We're open for business here. Another in the continuing lecture series, Sustainability Lecture Series here at the University of Montana. I'm Vicki Watson. I'm a professor in environmental studies, and we have one of these lectures every Wednesday night at this time. The next couple of lectures include, I believe next week it is actually going to be Matt Heisel of Home Resource, and also a couple of people from Heritage Timber here to talk about the deconstructing buildings and salvaging their materials and cycling that material back into the community to provide very low-cost building materials. So that's who our speakers will be next week. The week after that, we have Ashley Preston from the College of Technology and Brian Kern, formerly of the College of Technology, but with the university's sort of sustainable energy project. He'll be talking about a number of things in the way of alternative energy systems, and hopefully we're going to have either he or another person may be telling us a little bit about the university's proposed biomass plant. And then I believe the final lecture after that will finally be me talking about population and how the best investment in carbon reduction you can do is to support family planning. So those will be the remaining lectures. You may notice I'm wearing my Plant Peace t-shirt today. And students who have been in my classes for a long time know that I have a t-shirt for every subject. And when I started thinking about what might be an appropriate t-shirt to wear tonight, I came across this one and said, well, you know, all our sustainability efforts are really about planting peace, ultimately. But when it comes to sustainable shelter, and particularly sustainable shelter that goes so far as to be what we call a living building, that seemed to me to be a very, very clear example of planting peace. So our speakers tonight, I think, feel like they had a really great productive day. They really enjoyed both Missoula's beautiful fall weather and fall colors, but they also got to tour some of the Homeward projects this morning with Liz and Heather and Hannah from Homeward. They got to see the Orchard Homes project and the Equinox project, two of the more recent affordable housing projects that Homeward has put together, and as some of their more recent projects, they include a lot of green building elements in them. So affordable green housing. They got to do a little walk around Flat and say hi to the chickens and the things there at Flat. And let's see, in the early afternoon, they met with Sherry Peacock, UM's sustainability coordinator, and Jamil Chowdhury, the university's architect, who gave them a tour of UM's Native American Studies Center, which is a LEED Gold building, I believe, the university's first LEED building. And the university's policy is that now all new buildings on campus will be at least LEED Silver. And our speakers tonight will explain to you about what we mean by LEED. And then later in the afternoon, they met with the folks at Biomimicry Guild and the Sustainable Building Systems folks down on the Hip Strip, and heard about some of the great projects that they're undertaking and discuss some collaboration opportunities. And I see some of those folks here, some of the biomimicry folks here tonight. So they very much want to thank Missoula for embracing them and setting some time aside to talk with them, and for all of you for coming tonight to hear what they have to say. They also got to enjoy the food zoo. They were very impressed with the great food at the food zoo, all the farm to college, local Montana products that are served in our student cafeteria here. So I have to tell this little story about them. We came in earlier this evening for them to check out, see that the system was going to work for them. And what did they do before they left the room? They walked around and picked up all the caimans and took them out and put them in the recycling bin. They were worried that those caimans wouldn't get recycled. That's what you're like when you're from Seattle and Portland and places like that. You think about things like that. But I wanted to let them know that the students have also done something for them. We were a little concerned about some of our speakers flying in and about the carbon footprint of people flying in. So on 10-10-10 day, the big 350 day, a lot of these students went out and planted trees and did things like that as kind of a carbon offset for some of the, for our few speakers who flew in. Most of our speakers were local, but we had a few speakers who flew in. So the students did something for you as well. So I'd like to introduce these two folks. I'm going to have to take my glasses off because they're for long distance seeing and not close-up seeing. Stacy Smedley has a Bachelor's of Arts in Architecture from the University of Washington, and there she served as both the Vice President and President, I assume at 2 different times, for the UW chapter of the American Institute of Architects. After graduation, she spent 4 years working on a sustainable housing project in one of the Seattle neighborhoods. She was involved from the initial design phase through to the completion of construction. That project was the first LEED for Homes Platinum certified project in the state of Washington, and it was her introduction into Seattle's very vigorous green building community. She's been with KMD Architects for almost 3 years, where she has worked on hospitals, college labs, and jails. And she mentioned today that it's easier to build a green jail than a green hospital, and you may want to ask her about that later, why that's so. She currently co-manages a Living Building Challenge project, which you're going to hear them talk about today. She's very committed to working for the benefit of the community as well as for this sort of green architecture community. And she helped found KMD's Internal Sustainability Committee in order to foster sustainable practices as one of that firm's core principles. It also turns out she writes folk music and sings and plays the guitar. And I'm just feeling really bad that I didn't bring a guitar from home to get her to make a demonstration of that. The other so that's that lovely young lady, and next to her, that very handsome young man is my nephew, Chris Helstern, and he holds a Master's of Architecture from Texas Tech University. And at this point, I wanted to say, I assure you, students, that Texas Tech University is not a green architecture school. Chris had to teach green architecture to himself. And so I always like to urge students to say, you know, whether or not your university is teaching what it is you need to learn, you can still teach it to yourself, because Chris taught himself green architecture. His thesis focused on designing a sustainable elementary school in Seattle that allowed both students and faculty to be part of the building's many environmental features through education and practice. Again, you're going to be hearing about that tonight. Chris has been with KMD Architects for over 4 years, and he's also worked on hospitals, jails, office buildings, master plans, and most recently, a LEED Gold laboratory for the Pacific Northwest National Labs. So his current work, again, is on this Living Building Challenge that you're going to hear about. He's also a founding member of the Restorative Design Collective and KMD's Sustainability Community, again, convincing that fairly large, well, today they called it a medium-sized architectural firm. It sounded like a pretty big architectural firm to me, building their commitment towards the environment. And he also spent many years as an Alaska naturalist leading outback kayak trips. So if you want to try some outback kayaking, there's a guy to go with. So I hope you will give them your attention, and let's welcome them to Missoula.
So is anyone sleepy? If not, we're going to turn the lights down a little bit so you can see the screen a little better.
So we'll tell you kind of what we're going to do tonight's a 2-part lecture. First, we'll start with Living Building Challenge information, kind of walk you through what this challenge is all about. And then the second half will be a walkthrough of our case study of our project that's pursuing the Living Building Challenge. We'll break it up with questions in between there. So first, we'll start with Living Building Challenge. And how many of you have, let's actually back up and let's start with LEED. How many of you have heard of LEED projects, the LEED rating system? Excellent, perfect. So we won't go into detail on that. So as you're probably familiar, it's from the U.S. Green Building Council, and it's just a rating system for those of you that don't know to kind of make buildings more environmentally sustainable. It's a checklist of items to follow. But the Living Building Challenge actually goes well beyond LEED Platinum. and passes that in many different aspects, and we'll kind of go into a variety of those tonight. How many of you have heard of Living Building Challenge? Anybody there? Probably fewer. A few people. Okay, good. So then you can't correct us. There aren't many of you that know about it. We're just making stuff up here. So when you think of the Living Building Challenge, the way to start about thinking of it is it's based on a flower. So you think of a flower, it creates all of its own, everything it needs from its site. It grows out of the ground that it's in. It uses solar energy, it uses water that it needs. So it's really taking everything it needs from its own site. And the way they also break it up to thinking about a flower is that this challenge is divided into petals. So you think about each of the different petals, water, energy, which we'll go through here. So that's kind of the metaphor to keep in mind during this talk. So a lot of people ask, why is it a challenge? It's really a difficult thing yet that we used to be able to say has not even been proven, hasn't even happened yet. But as of just 2-3 weeks ago, the very first living buildings in the world were just certified. So there's one in New York, one in St. Louis, and a house in Victoria, BC. So it's really a challenge because not many people can do it yet. And now that these first ones are online, it's starting to show that this is something that can be done. There's several different versions of the challenge. There's a 1.1, I believe, is what those projects are certified under. And now there's a 2.0, which is what our project is pursuing, which you'll see later. So essentially the 2.0 hasn't been proven yet. So there's 2 rules for this, a little bit different than LEED. As you know, there's a checklist with LEED, so you can kind of pick and choose what perhaps sustainable features you want to go after. And that's not necessarily the best way to pursue sustainability in building. It's kind of what we have now, and so it's really something that's great, but it leaves some to be desired and some improvements as well. But the Living Building Challenge has a couple very simple rules. The imperatives are all signed to typology, and they're all mandatory. So that means you have to achieve every one of the petals. You can't just get part of the water one, part of the materials one, and then say that you're a living building. You either make it all or you don't. So that's a little bit more advanced, and it makes it rather simple to try to do it. The second piece is really that it's based on a year certification. So again, with LEED, as you're kind of going through the design process, you can pick the different checklist items that you want, and once you show proof of that, you can basically get your LEED certification. With Living Building Challenge, it requires a year reporting period. So your building has to actually perform and show what it does, that you say it does, for a year period. So you're going to have to keep track of energy and water and that sort of thing. And that actually makes the challenge a little bit more accredited.
So just like LEED, there's different versions of living buildings for different types of sites. Renovation is one. They encourage not just new buildings to go after this, but renovations to also try to achieve this. Landscape and infrastructure, so not just buildings. New buildings like what we're talking about tonight, and then neighborhoods as well. So they've got different things that they actually allow for different project types when necessary. Beyond that, there's different zones, just like in LEED. There's different, types of zones for this. So there's natural habitat, there's rural agriculture, village or campus. It gets more urban as you go along. So depending on what type of project you are, you'll pick which zone you are actually in. And then another interesting part about the challenge, depending on what size of building you are, like in our case, we're a small school building next to a large church building that shades us in most of the year. So we actually can't put solar panels for our building on our little roof. We have to put it on the next building over because that's where the sun is. So they allow you to scale jump to the next building if necessary to achieve net zero energy or water or any of the other petals.
So this is the first petal, which is site, and it's kind of, you'll see some similarities to LEED for those of you that know it. So first of all, they're kind of wanting you to have limits to growth. It's obviously better to build on a gray field site or a brown field site even to reduce urban sprawl. Urban agriculture, this is one of the new credits for the 2.0, which is kind of a really neat piece. A lot of the up-and-coming sustainability people are talking about urban agriculture, which I know you guys do a lot of here in Missoula. It's great to see. I think that's certainly a much better examples than we have in Seattle. So that's really great. But for living buildings, they want each site to be able to produce its own food. And that's based on each different size of the building. You'll see as we kind of click through some slides here, it's based on your floor area ratio. So as you can see, the smaller building you have, the more site you need for urban agriculture, and as your building gets bigger, you obviously have less space. So as you're in urban zones, it's much harder to do urban agriculture. But that's really kind of a nice piece to the challenge that is taking on some sustainability aspects that LEED really doesn't touch on.
The third petal, or the third imperative under this petal, is habitat exchange. Basically, for every hectare of land that you are building, you actually have to offset that by protecting an hectare of land somewhere else. So whether it's a wildlife preserve or native forest or a watershed, you actually are protecting the amount of land that you're using in your project, which I think is something unique and a nice feature of the challenge. Another one is car-free living. This is basically just promoting projects that are near public transportation, that are promoting pedestrian-friendly facades and streetscapes, just getting away from the need for the automobile. They also will not allow you to have more parking than required by code, and if you can, they want you to change the code and actually reduce your parking, so they want to see documentation that you've tried to do that.
So this is one of the more exciting ones as we get into, the other ones are kind of familiar to you with LEED. This is the water petal, which is a fairly big one, has some difficulties in it, and it's actually a fairly simple piece to remember. It's net zero water. So that means all of the water used on your project has to be collected from rainwater. So you're not allowed to use any city sources at all. It also has another piece to it, ecological water flow, which not only do you have to collect all of your water, but all the water that you use in the building has to be treated, and you can't really send it down the sewer to the city. And the idea there is that you're not using the city infrastructure, you're not helping create huge wastewater treatment plants and combined sewer stormwater overflows. It's that you're treating all the water on site. So we have to do that through stormwater, through the gray water, and even black water when your project has that. So fairly easy to remember, but a little bit harder to do.
The next one is energy, and again, it's the same thing where it's fairly easy to remember and pretty hard to do until you actually put the time in to figure out how to do it. It's net zero energy, so that just means that any energy you're using in your building, you must offset by producing the energy on site, whether that's through solar power or wind, and that's basically it. It's just a matter of figuring out how much energy you're actually going to need and then produce it.
Yeah, no combustion is allowed for that, so you can't use any kind of biomass or cogeneration plants, for instance. It's basically only solar and wind. So health, now we're kind of moving into the inside of the building, which again you'll see some similarities to LEED here. Civilized environment, so they want people to have access to daylight, operable windows, and this kind of is based a little bit more on the European model of things. Most projects in Europe that are trying to achieve this higher level of sustainability, almost everybody, for instance, in an office has access to an occupiable, or rather an operable window, which can really obviously change your productivity and your happiness and your health at work or wherever you are.
And just to note, this is a bad example on the screen right now. It's not a good example. People look at that and say, that's not what we'd want to work in. So they're just showing you what not to do in this slide.
So healthy air is another one too, where they're wanting you to promote indoor air quality. So this takes on to things like having vestibules in your entry space, having walk-off mats, which is similar to LEED, and then also doing air quality testing. Here's those things I just mentioned, meeting certain codes with ASHRAE systems, monitoring systems for carbon dioxide. So it's really similar to LEED with these portions here. They just go a little bit beyond.
This is another exciting one, I think, for us that we tried to embrace in our project. It's biophilia. That's where we're designing elements in the project to actually look back to nature for either their form or their function. And that's something unique when you're trying to design a building, to think that way. So they give lots of examples of how you can do that. Natural shapes and forms, trees and supports, animals, shells, eggs, sunlight, fire, just different things to think about when you're in the design process to make your building more organic and respond more to nature.
So materials, this is a fairly interesting petal, and actually one of the more difficult things to challenge when you're first starting out on living buildings and learning about them. You think, oh, net zero energy, net zero water, that's really hard. How are we going to have buildings that do that? And what we found really, which we'll talk about later, is that is fairly achievable. It's a goal that you can achieve yourself through engineering. So the team just kind of figures out the different strategies you're going to implement for that. Materials is quite a bit different because it's based on a lot of other people. So it's based on the building industry, it's based on products, it's based on set standards for years and years in the world as we're trying to collect materials, and we'll kind of explain that here. So the first part of the materials petal is the red list. I think this is a really great piece of the challenge here. The red list is basically this list of chemicals that you're not allowed to include in the building, and we will turn down the lights so you can sleep. So this is the list. These are the things you can't include in the building, and you think maybe some of these are fairly easy. Lead, nobody's really adding that to buildings. But then you get into other things like PVC, for instance, and as you may know, PVC is basically in everything, and we'll kind of show you that later as well. It's just simple piping. Halogenated flame retardants sounds really fancy, but it's almost every kind of fireproofing that's in almost everything that's fire retardant, which we have to have. So that becomes really difficult to get past those things. CFCs, cadmium, asbestos, those are all things that are inherent in so many materials. So as we go through our project, we're finding different materials to use, and what we have to do is actually contact all the manufacturers and determine what is in their product. And you think that's fairly easy, they put that on their website, that sort of thing. Actually, it's quite difficult. Many of the manufacturers don't even know what's in their product, and that's a little bit what's scary, and I think kind of the next portion of sustainability where things are going is learning more about products and the chemicals we use and the chemicals we put in our buildings and use every day. So as we go to these manufacturers, they're often finding they're having to go back to their chemists and kind of look through and determine what is all the materials in their very simple products sometimes. Sometimes just gypsum board, sheetrock, has a variety of different materials in it that the manufacturers aren't even sure of, and they go through and start finding these really horrible chemicals in them. So it's definitely an important part of the challenge as we work through and try to find that out. It's certainly presented a lot of roadblocks for us, particularly. As I mentioned, the industry kind of has to change as well. So for many years, people haven't really called out the industry on these chemicals. They just kind of use what's here. You pick a PVC pipe and you think we're not going to see it. It's buried and it doesn't really matter. But the fact is, it gets into almost everything that you do in a daily life. So we found that it's definitely important to check through those. There's another thing that a lot of the manufacturers provide is called an MSDS sheet, which is Material Safety Data Standards. So every manufacturer is required to put this sheet out. It's on almost every product, I think, in the world. So if you ever want to learn about what sort of chemicals are in a product, if it's fire retardant, what hazards are, that's the sheet they put out, and that's available to the public. But the problem there is that they don't necessarily disclose all the information. Certain government regulations they're not required to. So as we look at these sheets, hoping to find out what's included in the product, we often don't have the full story there. So we're having to go back through and kind of contact the manufacturers and have them dig deeper. And that's really been an eye-opening part of the challenge and a really important part.
I think another point on this is the reason they're having us do this in the first place is to affect change and actually have these manufacturers realize what's in their products and change what's in their products to be healthier for us. And we have a couple of examples of that on our project where manufacturers actually said, wow, we can actually make this project without PVC, and we'll start doing that because of what you're telling us. So there is an end result in this that's very rewarding once you put in the legwork and talk to all these folks.
Yeah, the building industry is rather huge, and it plays a large role in most materials. So the idea is that we can really affect some change and help change these things quite a bit. And that's just in the beginning stages so far. Embodied carbon footprint. This one is a fairly simple one. You're basically just offsetting whatever building you build with carbon offsets. So you have to just do kind of an end-use calculation and determine the embodied energy in your project, and you just buy a one-time offset for that. Responsible industry, this goes into a variety of things. One of the most talked about here is FSC wood. How many of you know what FSC is? Quite a few of you. Okay, for the ones that don't, it's a Forest Stewardship Certification. So what it is, it's a sustainable practices on forestry. So it's a body that certifies different timber organizations and determines that how they clear cut the forest. Hopefully they're not clear cutting it. The different sustainable practices they have, that they're not necessarily stripping away an entire forest, that they're kind of keeping their practices in check as they harvest the timber. And the wood that is actually harvested has to be tracked all the way from when it's a tree in the forest as it's cut down all the way to the end use as it comes on site for a building. So they attach a kind of a certification number to it so that piece of lumber can be tracked all the way through, and that just gives it a piece of certification. So it's a really great certification body, and I'll kind of put in a plug here for them. I think you may hear other things about Sustainable Forestry Initiative, SFI. as kind of an alternative to that. And if you do some research into it, you find out that SFI is not really a comparable system to FSC. FSC is certainly kind of the gold standard in certifying wood and ensuring sustainable practices. So all wood on the project must be FSC certified.
The next big one under materials is appropriate sourcing, and LEED has something similar to this where you have to source certain materials within certain radiuses based on what they are. Living Building Challenge has the same type of thing. It's a little bit more challenging and stringent. I think this is a good list that shows you. It separates it by specification division, which is how we organize our products when we're designing a project. The heavier the product or the material, the closer it has to come from. So things like concrete have to be within 500 kilometers. And it's tracking not only the manufacturing plant, but where every piece of that product or material is coming from or is extracted from as well. So if you have a metal door, you have to know where it's actually manufactured, but where that metal is extracted from as well. And that has to fall within these radiuses, which can be a challenge for certain projects depending on where they are. But it's all going back to trying to limit how much fuel and other things are being used to get materials to your site. So it's been a challenge for us as well, because some manufacturers don't actually know where every part of their product is coming from either, in terms of paint or metal or things like that. So. And then conservation and reuse. This is also similar to a LEED credit, where we're actually diverting 95 to 100% of all of our construction waste on the site to recycling facilities. And one difference with the Living Building Challenge is they won't let us send it to places where they're going to burn those materials because they don't want, obviously, the pollution to happen. So it has to be going somewhere where it's going to be recycled into another product of some kind.
Yeah, this is a more stringent requirement than LEED. It goes well beyond. It's, even in Seattle, this is hard to achieve, and we'll talk a bit about that. This is kind of a unique piece to the challenge, the equity pedal, just kind of looking more at an equitable environment and that buildings are more accessible for everyone. So it's not just the idea that you can build this grand multi-million-dollar huge living building, for instance, that is really only used by a few people and maybe doesn't help the community in a certain way. So these pedals kind of help to ensure that. Human scale and humane places, some of these are just almost the basics of architecture. We learned at the beginning you need to create spaces for people, things that are appropriately sized and scaled. You know, it doesn't make sense to have massive atriums and lobbies necessarily for people. You need to have things that are usable and comfortable. So this kind of just helps get back to that. Democracy and social justice. This is kind of a different pedal as well, where it talks about accessibility to communities and different public buildings. So the idea of that everyone can experience a public building and has the right to a sustainable design.
Again, these are bad examples.
That's right, yes. Don't build fences. Rights to nature, kind of another one along that idea is that they don't really want your building to take away from people or to harvest any of the natural resources that other people can be using. So here's a bad example of that. Somebody built a giant building and tower that takes away all the solar gain and nice sun features for people in these neighborhoods. So you kind of just want to think more about your neighbors and have a climate design that's responsive to your building's needs, but also the neighborhood as well. And lots of people forget that as they design. They kind of make buildings that are just islands sometimes. So it's good to remember the community.
This is also a unique pedal that's, I think, great during design, where you're actually thinking right away about things like beauty and spirit, and they're required. And one of the questions we get a lot on this one is, well, how do they judge if a building's beautiful or not? And it's not necessarily they are going to say, well, we don't like how your building looks. They just want us to prove that we thought about beauty when we were designing the project. And I guess the point of that is that if you design a building that's beautiful to you, it's going to be a building that's going to last longer for everyone else as well. So that's the point of that one. And then inspiration and education. So every project that's a living building must give back to the community. Community must educate them and must inspire them in some way. So at the very beginning of design, we have to incorporate those things into the building, which is a great way to actually start that process.
So those are the 20 imperatives. That's kind of the overview of the challenge itself. Now we'll talk a little bit more about what's happening with it. So this kind of shows you all the projects that are currently in pursuit. There's quite a few. I think 70 are currently in pursuit of the Living Building Challenge right now. And it's something that's expanding all over the world. We get that question a lot as well. So you can see there it's moving to Europe and Australia and Hawaii as well, parts of Asia. So it's really starting to get some wide response. So we'll kind of flip through just a brief view of a few projects, and these are actually the ones that are. Yeah, these are the two that have been certified. So this is Tyson Living Learning Center. It's at University of Washington campus in St. Louis, and it's the Omega Center for Sustainability, and it's in New York. So these are the current only living buildings in the world as of 2 weeks ago. And this is the residence at the top in Victoria, BC. So that's the first residence that's made it too. This is the next one to come online here. It's the Hawaii Preparatory Academy. They're going to be number 4. It's kind of an interesting project as they were obviously kind of isolated out there, so the appropriate sourcing had to be stretched for them a bit. Not a lot of resources in Hawaii, so they had to take some liberties there with that. But they've met all the other pedals, and we'll soon see the certification for that one. A few others in design, just some different renderings all over the world of other projects that are happening. These are all at various stages, some in construction, some still in design. This is our project up here, which you'll see many more pictures of. It's going to be the number 5, we're hoping. This is one of the neater ones, I think, down here at the bottom, the Oregon Sustainability Center. As you can see, it's pretty big. I think it's about, 200,000 square feet is what they're looking for. And it's about an $80 million project, so it's going to be a big one. It's going to kind of be a centerpiece and showpiece for the city of Portland. That'll be really great to see when that one comes out. They're still in the process of gathering the last bit of funding for it, and it's partially through design. So, some multifamily housing, the Botanical Garden up in Vancouver. Another local one. And then this is kind of where you can learn more about the Living Building Challenge. So we didn't mention at the beginning, it is similar to LEED, where there's a governing body for it. It's the International Living Building Institute, and this was actually developed from the Cascadia Region Green Building Council. There's a lot of different acronyms and names, but this is the group that is basically one of the founding chapters of LEED, of the U.S. Green Building Council, and the CEO put this together and created this challenge and kind of brought it with him and created this whole organization. You can go online, and there's lots of free areas to access. You can download copies of the challenge that we presented here, and you can learn more about it. There's also other free resources on there. You can kind of see some different white papers and other studies that have been done about it. This is something they talk about a lot in the Living Building Challenge, is breaking down barriers. So a lot of the things you've seen us present tonight, and we'll see in our project here, are things that you may think, how is this happening? These really aren't in building codes yet, and you're right on most accounts there. Building codes are still trying to catch up to a lot of these things that are happening. So that's part of what the challenge is doing, is helping to break down some of these code barriers, further educate different city organizations that these types of buildings are safe and appropriate and what should be done. So that's one of the big messages in the challenge as well. If you really want to learn more, there's these fantastic conferences they put on. If you're a conference attender, these are actually a lot better than a traditional conference. They actually call them the unconference because they're a little bit different. Really great breakout sessions where you get to actually be a part of things, learn more about, you become part of the presentation, you kind of get in focus groups and present ideas and create ideas with people. They're really great, super educational, and it's a great way to learn more about it. A lot of great green professionals from all over the world show up. So the next one's in Vancouver. And this is the website again. You can just kind of log on there and learn more about it. So that's that presentation. And what we can do now is kind of take a bit of a break and do questions on the Living Building Challenge piece. And then we'll come back, which we're not really going to go anywhere, but the next piece will be on our case study on that. So we can kind of break it up and start with questions on this piece. Anybody have that?
It seems like a lot of the challenge is really gathering information. Do you find that most of it is figuring out information on paper?
I think that's a big part of it, repeat the question. We can do that for you. She said, it seems like a lot of the challenge is about gathering information. Is that what we're finding, that we're just doing a lot of information gathering? And I think that's part of it, but I think we have to actually take that information and figure out how to put it into a building. And that's, I think, the second part of the challenge. And they have to work hand in hand, because until we know what materials we can use based on the information we're gathering, we don't really know what we can actually build. So it's kind of a two-step process, and those things happen at the same time, really.
You know, the more living building projects there are, the more of a database resource it'll create for future projects. So yeah, there is a fair amount of research at the beginning.
You say there were 30
There's about 70 under construction right now. 3 are certified.
70 in design right now. Yeah, 3 are certified. They're the only 3 in the world that have been certified.
Would you know how many architectural firms are involved in this project?
Quite a few, almost 70. I mean, there's a couple firms in here that have multiple projects, but for the most part, it's almost all individual firms. So quite a few people have taken on the challenge. Anything else?
So what codes did you bump into that you had to get around? And how did you get around?
I think the main one is water. We're a school building, so we have to deal with potable water. That for the challenge, we're supposed to gather all of that water on site, treat it to potable levels, and let the kids use it for washing their hands and things like that. And our health department doesn't like that idea quite yet, so they don't allow that at the moment. Other things I think would be the wastewater. Again, we're treating it all on site, but we still have to have that connection to the city that we're paying for with a pipe that goes into the sewer system that we're never going to use because that's just still what's required by code.
We can talk about a little more in depth is one of the materials on the red list. Well, let's think about it. Galvanizing is something that is really not done, and something that's really commonly galvanized is electrical conduit. So it's the silver pipe you see running everywhere that has all the electrical wiring in it, and that has often different chemicals in it, like cadmium and mercury in the process. So those items are on the red list. So what we had to do was go back and see that what the alternatives were to galvanizing conduit, which there aren't many. Most of city codes require electrical conduit to be galvanized. That's really the only thing they will allow and approve. And so you have to go in and look for different alternatives to that, which there aren't very many. And codes don't want to really take a variance from that. For instance, the city of Seattle wouldn't let us do anything but galvanizing, so we had to go for an exception on that. So anything that's required by code, the Living Building Challenge will allow to happen. So it's just, you're taking the first steps of making people aware of the things that need to change and putting it out there and hoping that these certifying agencies will start to change their mind.
How are you producing food in those local or those urban buildings?
The question was, how are we producing food in these urban buildings? I think one of the things that you notice that the bigger the building, the less they actually require. So on our site, we have a 1,400 square foot building, and I think about 700 square feet of agriculture that's required in our little landscaping area. So we're doing things like, since it's a school, doing educational things for them where it's ethnobotanical, and we'll talk more about this in our next presentation, but they're making things they're growing things they can make jam out of or weave baskets out of or things like that are actually education specific. But basically every square inch of our landscaping area had to be agriculture to meet the criteria.
So there's one back there. Yeah.
You mentioned before that the Living Building Challenge is more of an absolute, where you have to actually address everything in your project versus LEED, where you can pick and choose points. I'm curious, are there any sites that are just, say, in the middle of the desert or places like that you could not do a building that would fall into meet the criteria of the Living Building Challenge? Because I was thinking about water. I mean, there's certain issues that you have to address with LEED or make exceptions for it. It sounds like there's exceptions in this, but is there an impossible site?
Yeah, is there an impossible site? Good question. So the International Living Building Institute has taken that into account, and so what they want to do is encourage projects to achieve as many petals as they can. So for instance, if you are in a desert and you can't get the water petal, but you may be able to get everything else, you won't necessarily be called a full living building, but you'll be able to show that you've achieved all of these petals except for water, for instance. So they're really not bending rules to make exceptions on what is a living building, but they understand that maybe not everything is achievable at the moment. So, but I think it's still a huge accomplishment for somebody to, achieve most of the petals, but a couple. So, good question.
So how will that Hawaii building become certified?
Yeah, the Hawaii building, it's got exceptions in terms of its sourcing, which is a little bit different, where it can pull its different products from, which is kind of a difference than an entire water petal, for instance. And they're still working on certifying that, so we're actually curious to find that out as well. That'll be done in about January, February, so we'll see what the final ruling is.
How long is the operational wait period before certification can happen?
Question was, how long is the operational wait period before certification? And it's 1 year. So from the time your building is substantially complete, you have 1 year where you have to actually report everything and prove that you've achieved net zero energy and water, basically.
As criteria, do you look at economics, affordability?
That's a good question.
Yeah, and that is kind of a good question for right now. As we get into our project, you'll see these first living buildings are something that are going to be a little bit more costly. Just as people are beginning to learn about the challenge, as it's being more accepted, and products are being created that can help meet it. So right now, there is an additional cost to living buildings. We're not completely sure what that is yet, as our project is still kind of finalizing that, and all the cost data is not out yet. But what they want to do is make it achievable so that it can be something that is accessible to everyone. I mean, that's part of the petals of social democracy, social justice.
Yeah, when LEED came out a while ago, LEED projects were substantially more expensive because it was still a scary thing, and builders and contractors and manufacturers didn't quite know what to do with it. And over time, it's gotten less and less experience. We're now expensive, where LEED Silver is actually, the same cost and pretty easily attainable. So the idea is that we're just pushing the industry a little bit farther, and eventually living buildings will also be that same level of attainability.
What's the best way to get heat in the northern climates without combustion?
So for us, you'll see our case study here. We have radiant flooring, which is going to provide the majority of our heat. And just generally, they want you to do appropriate, site location. Just general passive design, solar heat gain is really the kind of way they want to bring you back to simple systems, before mechanical systems, really.
Is it a thought of just combustion you want to reduce emissions, or is there any type of combustion that might be acceptable within specific areas?
Yeah, right now there's no combustion that's acceptable to ILBI. They do want to reduce emissions, reduce the reliance on that type of fuel, and just kind of go back to more passive strategies. Okay, well, we'll switch over to the next presentation. You're welcome to stand up and twist and turn around and go to the case study portion. Okay, I'm going to try the microphone a bit here and see if that helps better too for other recording processes.
A lot of people just went to the bathroom.
I think they just left. So we'll start with our project here that we've been discussing a bit, and this was formed. What we did is, we're from KMD Architects, but we formed what's called the Restorative Design Collective, which is just a group of professionals that we created to help make these living buildings possible.
So we showed you that slide about Living Future in the previous presentation, and we actually learned about the Living Building Challenge at Living Future 2009, and got really excited about it and thought, wow, this is something that we really want to prove is possible. How are we going to do that? We work at a firm that does really large buildings, and we thought, we need to do something small and something where we could actually test out all these things and do a built case study in some ways. So we got back to our offices in Seattle and thought, well, if we could find a project small enough and maybe find a team that would be willing to donate their services for free for a client that would like one of these buildings, that would be really, really neat. So we basically contacted all of these people and formed the design team that was going to do the project under the Restorative Design Collective name. We all worked pro bono. We also collaborated with our county and city governments, as well as the University of Washington and the Integrated Design Lab. All of these people donated time and energy to make the project happen.
So we'll talk about the project, how it began, and how we found our client. We were actually just kind of looking around for some local projects that exemplified sustainability in Seattle, and this led us to the Birchie School. They were a campus that had the first LEED Gold building in the state of Washington, so they'd really done some great things, and we went there to go take a tour of their building and kind of see what they had for us. And as we got to talking with some of the owners there, they mentioned their desire to one day have a living building. Which really surprised us because, as you might know, not many people know about living buildings. It's kind of more an industry thing, and it was just up and coming. So we were really shocked to hear somebody not in the building industry, want to do a living building. So right away, that kind of flipped on the light, as Stacy talked about, and we decided we can offer them our services and get one built. And of course, they did not turn down a free project. We were shocked by that. So just a brief overview of the Birchie School, a couple of photos of their LEED Gold piece here. You already see that they've been way ahead of the curve. I think this was finished in 2006. They've already had solar panels and cisterns on site collecting rainwater, so they've already done great. It's about 230 students there. And it's also a great school that has a lot of sustainability built into their curriculum for years and years. So you can see that last statement down there is part of their mission statement. Sustainability is built right into it. So they've been teaching the kids right from the beginning, of pre-K through 5, different sustainable practices. Each grade will have a certain unit that they study. For example, 3rd grade studies water for the year, 4th grade will study energy. So they just really carry it throughout their curriculum and you know, practice it as well. I have local sustainable farm food provided, just a variety of things. So it's a great school, great a client for us. It really worked out perfectly. So now we'll kind of start with the design, a little bit of the process.
And the fun part about doing a project for a school that already has sustainability in their curriculum and for this age group is that the kids are really our client. So we actually got to go and sit down with the kids and say, hi, we're going to do a living science building for you. What does that mean to you guys? What do you want a living science building to be for you? So the kids actually came up with a list of you know, wish list basically that they went through with us. These are actual quotes from them. I'll read a couple of them because they're pretty great. I think a good one is, I'm not going to say this word for word, but they wanted a bamboo type fountain outside where they could go to relieve their stress because they have a lot of stress, you know, being elementary school kids. They wanted something like falling water, Frank Lloyd Wright, where the water is all exposed. They wanted a river running through their classroom where they could actually take the tiles up and test the water to see what was in it. They wanted windows in the ceiling so they could see the sky and a living wall where things would always be growing. So off that list, we were able to actually incorporate all of these things, and they really actually drove the design, which was pretty exciting for us.
They wouldn't do the work, though. I don't know why. You couldn't get them there. Too small.
So this is a video from Living Future that we actually put together and basically telling our story a little bit.
A couple minutes. You can see some interviews from the kids.
I think it was Gandhi that said our future depends on what we do in the present. And that's why I'm excited about this new building.
A living building is a building that produces its own energy by harvesting its own rainwater and using solar panels to collect energy. It has no impact on Earth. It takes care of itself. We'll constantly be learning from it.
I'm looking forward to the living building and the community that's going to be in it.
Many of the ideas that you heard for the 5th graders gave to Stacy and Chris. Do you remember when we brainstormed about it in September, and one of you said, wouldn't it be cool if there were a screen that ran through the room? And I thought, that really would be cool. I didn't think that would ever be possible, and here it is.
I'm most excited about the river that flows through the classroom because you can see like what's in the water. A new part of the Living Science building is that we'll have a composting toilet. The composting toilet will not use any water. Next to the science room, there's going to be an ethnobotanical garden where there's native plants, some kiwi, plums, blueberries, and there'll be stepping stones so you can step.
I think the garden idea is pretty cool too, because we'll be able to grow our own stuff.
The red list, the things on the red list, you know the smaller vehicle, that was used with toxins. They were used to make it, so, and that's what gives off the smell. So things like that, they're not going to be allowed in the building. These systems, like the ones that are out down there by it, and when the rainwater falls into the cisterns, it will go through the river and then out into the garden. And someone suggested a fountain out there. And the fountain will be powered up by solar power.
Kids are super cute, right? Yeah, that's pretty good. We're always impressed every time we go there. They're quite knowledgeable. They've learned something else in their classes about the living building, and they're saying words like ethnobotanical in 3rd and 4th grade. So we're really impressed by them. We're a little afraid for our jobs, actually. They seem to know what they're doing.
So beyond the kid portion, which is also very exciting, we also have the restorative design collection portion, which is also very exciting. It's been pretty awesome to have this group of people that are so committed to doing this, donating their time and services with us. And we did a series of charrettes, which at the beginning of the project, we just get together in a room and brainstorm about how we're going to achieve these 20 things we have to achieve. And at points, there were 30 people in the room doing that. So just the process of collaboration was pretty inspiring.
So this is kind of introduction to the site. We mentioned it's located in Seattle. So for those of you familiar with it, it's just a bit north of downtown in the Capitol Hill neighborhood, which is basically right in downtown. And the school has acquired this. On this side, you can see this is about their entire site, the entire block there, the project site. They've converted old homes into different schoolrooms, which has been really great. And this is their LEED Gold edition we mentioned earlier down here in the corner. So it's kind of a neighborhood school there. This is the current rendering of the exterior. You can see, we'll talk a little bit more about this. The main square piece that's more rectilinear and simple is kind of the general classroom, which you'll see a plan of in a minute. And then the other large piece with the curtain wall area here is the eco house, and basically it's just a fancy architecture term that architects have to name stuff. We don't know why, but it's just basically a greenhouse. The students do a lot of work with plant studies, soil studies, water studies. So they really wanted a greenhouse type structure. So what we did was kind of combine it with the classroom and join it together in sort of one form, but it's a little bit more organic, you can see with the curving shapes on it. This is a plan of that. You can see the rectilinear classroom area, just really standard teaching space. And then the curving area of the eco house off to the side. The interesting piece here is the little blue squiggly line is our runnel, which carries water through it, and we'll kind of take a look at that as we go further in here. But you can see the runnel starts from the inside and carries through to the outside as well. That eco house area opens up to an outdoor classroom as well, so that can be open, and it's basically a third teaching space in there. Just a roof plan. You can see a little bit of the biophilic design that the landscape architects carried through here, kind of making the shell forms in the roof. You'll actually see those patterns in the moss mat roof system that we have up there. The building is viewed from above. You see the church back there that's been converted into classrooms as well, so there's a couple levels of classrooms up there, so the students will have a great close-up view of the green roof system and then be able to look right down on actually see this. Typically as architects we draw fun looking things in plans, but not everybody gets to see them because you're only looking at it from bird's eye view, so this is actually one that'll be worthwhile. Oh, and you can see the rain garden area that was just out to the north of the site. A little bit of maybe an interesting video we'll kind of talk through a bit. This is just kind of the start of the groundbreaking as they are beginning to put in the first irrigation and potable water cisterns. Just kind of fun to see for those of you that don't get to see construction very much. We watch it all the time, but maybe that's not so great. So you're seeing here they're just digging for the potable water cistern, which is placed in the eco house for us. It's kind of in the floor. So you'll see this is a time lapse. We have a great webcam that the school has put up so we can monitor construction and see when people are taking really long lunch breaks, which they don't like, but you can see them kind of shoring up the hole here, and then they drop in these pre-manufactured cisterns that'll hold the water for us. So we have two of these. There's the potable water cistern here, which is being installed, and there's also one that's out in the garden away from the building. That's the irrigation cistern for all the landscaping. As they kind of drop it in, it's just fun to see. We won't bore you to death with that. And there it is. It's got a lid. It's a traditional manhole type cover that you normally see in the streets. Does it want to advance? And just kind of a reminder of what it looked like. A couple of interior renderings here. Looking into the classroom, the rectilinear space there, you can see down at the bottom of the picture there's the runnel. The eco house is off to the left. You can just see the glass wall. This is just looking right back that other way, in the far corner is where we were just standing looking back. So another shot of the classroom. We have exposed glulam beams that run up in the top for the ceiling structure, so that'll be all exposed for everyone. This is a rendering of the Eco House. We have a bit of a mezzanine structure up there. The kids can kind of go up and do different gravity experiments and things, and just kind of is a nice place for them to go. You know, kids like to climb up things and have little areas to go in. They can do that and get right along this green wall here, which you see in the distance in the back there, and we'll talk a bit about that too.
Okay, so we'll start with the site. The site features are actually pretty exciting. The urban agriculture portion, our landscape architects and our urban ecologist actually did a great job researching native plants that were used by Native Americans in our area and what they were used for. So beyond just plants that are going to be harvested for food consumption, there's things like berries that are going to be used for dyes that they can actually use in their art class, ferns they're going to use to do basket weaving, and also, again, things like jam that they can actually do as part of the science curriculum. And again, Chris mentioned the green roof. We are in the shade most of the time because we're in the shadow of that church building, so a moss mat roof seems to fit pretty well in our instance. And also, it's going to be the first moss mat roof in the Northwest, so it's a case study just to see how that goes as well. And again, different kinds of mosses will have the different colors that you're seeing there in that picture.
First moss mat people are actually paying for on a roof in Seattle. If you've been there, you've seen.
That's a really good point. And then rain gardens as well. Our water system, which we'll go through in detail in a minute, ends with a rain garden that's adjacent to the exterior runnel, where any water that overflows out of the cisterns will go and actually be absorbed on site. And then again, the biophilia. I think it's more obvious now that you've seen the plan how we're incorporating that into the site, the shell shape.
Meandering rivers too, we're keeping that in there, so it's just kind of really natural, calming, organic shapes.
And then the living wall, again, is another exciting piece, and this is something the kids are super excited about. It's already being grown right now. It'll be installed in a few weeks, and basically it's treating all of our gray water. So any water that's coming from our sinks is going up into that wall and being soaked up by those plants.
We had to do a variety of studies for this living wall. You just can't plant a wall of plants inside and expect them to grow, especially for these that are tropical plants. They have to uptake a lot of water. We're having them uptake about 55 gallons of our gray water a day, so in order to clean. And obviously plants need sunlight energy in order to perform. So we've had to do a lot of really complicated daylighting studies in order to get this to happen. And truthfully, we're not even really sure how well it's going to work. It's kind of a new thing, so we've put a lot of different models to it and had a lot of different engineers working on it to see if this is something that can be done. And right now we've got, as you can see from this lighting study, we've got quite a bit of light coming in naturally. You can see the bright yellow lighter colors is a skylight we have up there, and the darker is the less amount of light. We're having to add a couple of actual electric lights to it as well. This is the pattern that we'll have on there, so it's not just a plain looking wall. It's going to be a kind of nice different pieces. The numbers represent a variety of different tropical plants that will be grown, so it should create a really nice pattern. And the photos you just saw pop up there are where the plants are about a month ago. As Stacy mentioned, they're already growing, so as soon as they install them, they'll be ready to go. It'll be a fully mature wall, so you don't have to wait for it to sprout up. It'll look nice right away. It's just another view of it. You can see the rendering, and this is kind of what that wall looks like in reality right now. So the water piece, we talked about this a bit, potable and treatment. We'll kind of go through.
So again, there's the two imperatives with the Living Building Challenge, the potable side and the gray water side. So first we'll talk to you about how we're collecting the water. The rainwater falls on our roofs. We're actually scale jumping in this instance too, so we're collecting the roof off of that church building too, the rainwater off of the church building too, to get enough water for what we need. So the water comes down and goes into two different gutters. The first one comes off the church roof and goes down into the runnel and actually runs through the classroom, so that runnel will only be full of water when it's raining. The second one goes into the valley of our metal roof and is collected and inserts into the river in the Eco House portion of the project. It's collected in the potable cistern, which you saw being installed under the Eco House. Cistern fills up. It overflows into the exterior runnel. Then it goes into the non-potable cistern. That cistern fills up. It goes back into the exterior runnel, and then once that's filled up, it overflows into the rain garden. So we went through a series of designs to figure out a way to make all of this really visible to the kids. So they'll be able to watch that river fill up and overflow and just see the process and know how much water is actually being contained that way.
It basically illustrates the water cycle for them so they can just follow all the steps. So then we have the second piece, which is the ecological water flow we mentioned in the Living Building Challenge piece. This is our gray water treatment. So for this, our potable water cistern is filled from the water we've collected from rain. Then the water is pumped into our classroom sinks. We have 3 in there that are just used for general science purposes, and we also have a restroom, so there's a lavatory, a sink in there. So 4 sinks in the entire building that'll be supplied with this water. The gray water flows back from those sinks that have been used into a gray water holding tank that we have in the building, and that's a separate tank you'll see here in a moment that filters out the water. From there, it goes up into the living wall, which we looked at, and it kind of is percolated down through it. The living wall is created by its kind of a tray system, so all the plants are in these plastic trays that are mounted on the wall, and the water is kind of trickled and runs back through behind them, so it's kind of in their soil, and that's how it'll be dripped down. The gray water is absorbed, does its evapotranspiration work. Remaining gray water falls into a planter, and anything that doesn't make it evapotranspirates, kind of recirculates, and the process repeats again until that water has fully evaporated. And this is the interesting piece we mentioned, I think, about the city wouldn't allow us to put any of the gray water outside the building. They wanted everything to be contained. We've even tried to do subsurface, just kind of bring it outside and have it buried under a couple inches of water or soil, and let the ground naturally clean the water as it normally does. But the city codes frowned upon that and wouldn't allow us to do that. So that really doesn't make a lot of sense yet, but I think the city is kind of open to looking at that, and this is what we came up with instead of. So we talked a lot about the runnel. This is kind of just a view of it. You can see the far right picture is just kind of one of the more recent photos of it as it's been cast into the slab. A little drawing there to see what it's how it's actually built. Little turn downs in our slab, and then it's actually hand formed with pebbles, and it's obviously on a slope so that it flows through the classroom, covered over with about an inch thick piece of glass so the students can walk over it and look right down through it and see the whole thing. And there's one removable panel at the end so that they'll be able to access the water and test it. That other photo is just kind of an example of another one, so you can see similar. Ours will look prettier than that. This is the gray water tank that we have that'll help filter the water first. You can see the process there. It's just a series of filters and pumps that help to clean the water, and then it moves on out into the living wall. So interestingly, this is one of the pieces we talked about materials, how PVC pipe is not allowed. This is one of the manufacturers that has PVC included in this device here to obviously transport the water. It's the common pipe type that's used. We told them it doesn't work for us and we can't use it. And the manufacturer has actually decided to change their process here and go to pipes that are not PVC. So something different to embrace the challenge. So it's really great. For our potable treatment, we haven't talked a lot about this yet, but obviously you'll need to have drinking water in this building. So ours runs through a complex system of UV filters, ultraviolet lights, and carbon filters to help clean the water. And kind of the caveat with this is right now the Department of Health, King County, and the state don't allow you to treat your own water. So what we're doing is installing the system, going to have it all built and ready to go, and basically just have a valve we can switch over when they allow us to do that, which we think is coming fairly soon. There's a lot of great meetings happening with the city, and they're really open to things so far and looking at how this can be accomplished. They're really kind of concerned on a Department of Health aspect, and we don't blame them for that for sure. They want to ensure that people are treating water to appropriate what's called a Class A standard. So I think once they realize that people can do this with these very advanced systems that treat it as good as or better than your city water in many cases, we think that'll change. So that'll be a great piece too. These are all exposed pieces that are on the walls in the Eco House for the children to see as well.
So energy is the next one. And these are our actual solar panels that are already installed on the church building for us. This is how much solar power we need to power our little building. It's 12 kilowatts, and you'll see the calculations coming up. Here's just an output. They're already tracking how much energy it's producing for us to make sure we're going to meet what we need. So that's just the output that we get from the company. And again, when we were in the design phase, one of the first things we did was try to figure out how to reduce the amount of energy we actually needed, so we didn't have to, create a larger system than we needed in terms of solar energy. So these are some of the strategies we went through, and the biggest one is actually occupant education. They plug in a lot of things like microscopes and things like that, leave lights on. So just having the teacher and the students realize that let's turn things off when we don't need the extra light, or at the end of the day, let's turn off a switch so everything in the building actually is shut off overnight so we're not using any energy.
Some of the negative press you probably heard with LEED buildings is true, that people build these really environmentally friendly buildings according to LEED, but then it turns out they actually are using more energy than typical buildings. It's kind of the same thought as when people buy a low-fat bag of cookies but then eat the whole bag. So it's not quite helping. So people have to kind of train themselves to not leave these efficient lights on and perform appropriately in the building. So it's a lot about occupant education. That's really a huge factor in all of green building, not just for energy, but for water use and everything. So our healthy indoor environment, we have a variety of these strategies. We talked about daylighting as one of our factors. We had some daylighting modelers in Seattle take a look at this, and we're able to actually meet quite a bit higher than the LEED for Schools rating of the amount of foot candles needed for a daylit school. So we have quite a bit of nice light. It's all from the north, so we don't really have to worry about any overheating and extra solar gain that we don't need. So it's worked out quite well. A couple of the strategies we're using also for that, just skylight traditional system there, and then Solitubes, which you may have seen just kind of as more of an educational piece to get light into some of the areas that are a little bit more tricky to have skylights in. We also have a good system of HVAC, heating, ventilation, air conditioning. We have what's called an ERV in our project. I'll stop using acronyms, I promise. It's an energy recovery ventilator. So what it does is help recapture some of the heat that's lost in a traditional building. So it'll just kind of recycle and recirculate any of the heat that's produced in your building and not just eject it outside as a complete waste loss. And we obviously have a variety of high efficiency filters, really fine filtered things to clean the air.
And then again, the materials challenge. First of all, this is a good picture. It's actually showing our site and the contractor starting to sort through the different materials we're using so they can be diverted from the landfills. And this is a good one. Just the red list, which you've heard about now. All the different things that are on there, we've learned a lot about what's not so good about them. And this is just a picture to kind of reiterate that. There's galvanizing to the lower right. PVC, again, Chris will go into detail about why that's not so good. There's a big pile of it next to that PVC, no PVC sticker, showing what happens to it when it gets taken out of a building a lot of the times. There's a cute little turtle eating some plastic, which is not good. And again, no lead added in any products. You have to be really careful about that, which we found.
So I think just quickly I'll back up and touch on the waste piece, which was interesting for our project. Seattle has great waste stream management, really able to handle a lot of building recycling, can typically handle the LEED requirements, which are pretty high, 90 to 95%, no problem. But for living building, we have to go beyond that and go to 100%. And these are the most advanced plants in the country in some instances, and they had trouble meeting this. And they've actually done a great job of deciding to completely separately sort our building's materials once it arrives on their site. So they're keeping it separate from the waste stream and individually breaking out pieces for us, because what they do, as Stacy mentioned, is they like to send some of the waste to farms and burn it as fuel and kind of used in that waste, and that is not really what the Living Building Challenge allows, as we talked about, no emissions. So they're separately dealing with that, and that's a hard thing to meet even in Seattle, so kind of an interesting piece. So Stacy talked about the dangerous materials, and this is our one downer slide on the whole presentation. Just because we think it's really easy, we talked a bit about, or really interesting to learn, we talked a bit about PVC as really a hazardous material, and that's an easy one to stick on because it's so common. As you'll see in these everyday products, and I could have just listed hundreds and hundreds more. I think, even we didn't realize this at the beginning. It's in almost everything, and things that you touch on a daily basis. This is a really scary slide, I apologize, but the thing about PVC too is it's hazardous throughout its lifetime. So once it's made, the product still has all the hazards in it. So even after it's been installed, it's still leaching things. It's not just the manufacturing process, which is really horrible, and you can see there all the different health effects. It basically will do anything bad to you. So really there's a huge movement to try to reduce PVC and get this out of the building stream. The industry needs to be educated on this to try to remove that, because they're really stuck on PVC. It's easy to use, easy to make, but as you see, it causes a lot of problems, and it's around us every day. So that's part of the Living Building Challenge, is to remove this. And you guys can partake in this too yourselves as you buy things in the store. Check and see if it's PVC. When you get a shower curtain, for example, make sure you're not getting a PVC one, or a variety of other things here. You note, I'm sure a lot of the parents in the room already pay attention to the toys and things. That's an easy one, but it's in a lot of things. So you can kind of take a look at that one yourself. FSC wood, as we mentioned, this is kind of what we have on our project, a couple of shots of our wood there. Something interesting that we found out about this, maybe for us and not everybody, that even though every piece of wood has to be certified with a number and tracked very diligently throughout the project, it comes with sheets of paper that also tell every individual piece of wood, so it really catalogs it. Not every piece of wood has to be have a sticker on it when it shows up to site, so that kind of freaked us out for a little bit until we figured out that that's okay. So these are often the pictures you'll see. FSC's done a great job of getting into the mainstream, so as you go to Target and different stores, you'll start to see that on Kleenex boxes and a variety of other products now as something that you can be confident in as a good forestry managed project.
And just in terms of our project, I think one thing to note is you think, living in Washington, we'd be able to get FSC certified wood easily and for everything, but we're actually having a really hard time right now finding FSC certified cedar trim for our exterior siding. We still haven't found an answer for that one. So we're still running up against these roadblocks where that's not available in the quantity we need and in the area that we need it. And then interior materials, again, these things have to be sourced and extracted and made with products not on the red list. So we're using things like reclaimed fir for our casework and recycled concrete counters for our countertops. An interesting thing about the countertops, the manufacturer we were using was getting his cement from Mexico because it was more sustainably made there. But again, we have to meet sourcing requirements. So we're actually having someone try to make that cement locally for us. The fir casework.
So we started out with bamboo casework in the beginning, because that's obviously a really sustainable material. Everybody wants to use bamboo, but what we found out for us is that doesn't meet the sourcing requirement because it's all grown in China. Apparently there's like 140 species of bamboo, and the ones that are used for architectural strength are all in China and not expected to be in the U.S. for another 10 years or so. So we switched to fir. Education is a huge piece to our building, especially. We mentioned, it's for the kids, so we want them to take part in these different features of the living building and really be able to use it. So you'll see all these different gauges that we'll have are going to be readily accessible to the kids. As we mentioned, the math students will kind of graph all of our energy use over the period of time. They'll also take readings on the water, the amount of water we're getting, what we're collecting, what we're using, and they're going to store all that information for our year reporting period for the Living Building Challenge. So you can see we have very simple gauges everywhere for them to use. And the picture over to the far left upper corner there, you'll see is just the exposed pipes that'll all be labeled. I'm sure you've seen that in different mechanical rooms. So they'll be able to trace the path of different water and what's used in the building and actually see the systems work. Down at the bottom is a little fun picture of a pump. For those of you that have used these before, apparently they're really, really old. Were really hard to find as well. So this is kind of just to teach the kids that when you turn on your faucet, there's a lot more to water than it just coming out and being readily available to you. A lot goes into getting clean drinking water. Most of the people on the planet don't have it. I think 3 billion people are within 3 hours or so walk of clean water on the planet, which is just an amazing statistic. And in America here, we're so used to just flipping on the faucet for anything. So this kind of teaches the kids that it takes a little bit of work and be a little more cautious with the water you use. We also have some art in the building that's been provided. We'll have local plants kind of cast into the concrete for them to see. It helps with their different studies. Same with salmon. We had a local artist produce the 5 species of salmon for the kids that'll be cast into the floor. So that's one of their main studies is salmon. They do quite a large portion on that. They actually go out to one of the spawning areas in the city and watch the runs and really take quite a lesson on that.
And again, this is just an reminder before we look at some construction photos of why we're really doing it. It's all for these guys, and they're going to be graduating from high school in 2018, and they're going to grow up and thinking that this is just the way things should be, and that's pretty inspiring for us.
This is kind of the last portion, just a few construction photos. We'll kind of go through the process here. They're theoretically in order. So this is the installation of the cistern, as you saw. Very tight site, as you can see. So they tried not to keep the big equipment in there for very long. The Eco House just starting to be formed here. The footings being poured. You can see in the back, this is that big curving wall that the green wall will be held on, the concrete wall. This is it cast. So some more work as they're beginning to pour some of the other footings and stem walls that are around the building that'll hold up our wood-framed construction. Kind of a close-up of those walls. So this is just the base wall, and all the wood framing will sit on top of these. An overall view. It's a really pretty site. They have a great view up over, if you know Seattle, Lake Union, and also down you can see the Olympics, and just a really great spot there. Sometimes the kids watch us. They poke their heads out and get to see the construction up close, so that's really great. Got another progress shot as things are moving along, more walls being cast, starting to fill in the foundation area. This is the beginning of the slab pour, so we insulated under the slab for extra insulation. You can see that's the bright silver that's down there as they put in the rebar. So we talked a little bit about the conduit issue, the galvanized conduit we weren't allowed to use, but the city required. So what we were able to work out with the Living Building Challenge is that the dangers of these toxins in the galvanizing is that they can leach off into the water and ground source area. So what we did is we encased them in our concrete slab, so that encapsulated all the chemicals in there so that they wouldn't be in contact with the earth. As we're beginning to pour the slab. We actually have two slabs in our project. It's a structural slab first, about a 4-inch slab. Then on top of that, there's a 3-inch topping slab, which the radiant flooring system is included in that. This is a little shot of the rain garden. You can see some of the catchment basins out there, and you can just start to see the little bit of the curving area here is the exterior runnel. They're beginning to kind of form up that area, and see some of the piping that'll handle some of that water out there. This is about where we're at now. Framing has started. Our FSC framing, our 2x12 walls, very thick, so we can have a lot of insulation in them. We have about R40, R42 for our walls, the resistance. So it's really highly insulated. Getting to sheathe and framing is continuing on. This is about just a couple days ago. You can see down there in the bottom corner, these panels are our SIPS panels, which is the roof. For those of you that may or may not know about SIPS panels, it's a structurally insulated panel system. So what it is 2 sheets of basically like a plywood, and then in between that is the white is the insulation piece. And this is an all completely structural system. So instead of putting in the traditional beams and trusses first and then laying on different layers for the roof, it's all in one piece. It's a lot more economical that way. It comes to the site already pre-fit to our size, so they're not cutting things and wasting, and then the insulation is in there as well.
Yeah, it lets us get a much higher insulation value for the roof too. We're up about R60 for the roof.
See some shots on the inside here. We'll look familiar to a rendering, almost. That one, maybe, kind of, maybe not. Same thing on the other side. You see our glulam beams that are exposed. So these are pre-engineered beams as well. They've been sized and built off-site specifically, so again, there's no cutting and waste of material.
We've tried wherever possible to expose the materials we're using. So in terms of the SIPS panels, that that plywood's going to be the finished roofing surface. So when the kids are in the space, they can actually see the materials we use to construct the building instead of us covering it up with something else.
More shots here, about from the Eco House area, looking back. You can see it's a much higher space. It's the top of the Eco House, the glulam beams. There, this is what they see from the classroom above. And this is the most recent picture we just pulled off about half an hour ago from the webcam, so this is where they are at today. We just almost finished the installation of the SIPS roof, you can see there. So the next step for the roof will just be to lay on the metal roofing, and that's really all there is to it. The other pieces will get the green roofing. So a really simple roof system helps cut down on materials as well. So that's kind of the overview of the project. I think this statement kind of sums up what we hope Living Buildings will do in this project, and I imagine many of you that work in the sustainability field feel this as well, that it's really about the next generation and what we can educate them with and how they can help continue to move this movement forward. So thank you.
And again, we could take questions on the project or any other questions that might have come up while we talked.
Do you anticipate problems with humidity, and how are you handling venting or anything everything of the living wall?
That's a good question, yeah. So it's kind of a greenhouse space, so it's not the traditional classroom area, so it can be a little more humid. We have operable windows to take care of that, and we also have, as you saw, our energy recovery ventilator. It actually exhausts air into that room, so it'll be blowing in kind of a warmer, drier air to help, dry that space up a bit. So far, what our calculations show, not too moist.
But again, it's still an experiment, so if it's a little moister than we think it's going to be, we'll deal with it. But we're doing what we can to mitigate it at this point.
I was wondering why you put the cistern underground and then had to pump the water up as opposed to, because it looked like you were capturing a lot of the water off the church roof and onto the other roof. So why did you put the cistern?
This again goes back to code issues. Our site's really tight, and we had setback requirements, and they would not allow a cistern of this size to be within the setback. We tried really hard, but that was code driven.
A certain gallon size couldn't be exposed.
You said that one of the requirements is that the certification is based on a year of actual performance. If you're at this phase in your design, in your building process, and you expect to gain your certification in January, how does that, did I misunderstand something?
Yeah, we'll be done with construction in January, then it'll be a year from that point until we're actually certified.
Right.
Yeah.
I didn't see any of your solar batteries. Does that mean you have to produce your power but not use it? You're still tied to the grid?
It's a good question. It's kind of not a traditional system where we're storing it in batteries. We're tied to the grid, and we can sell back our power. So what we have is a bunch of micro inverters on each panel, which is supposed to be a little bit more, for those of you that know about PV systems, a little bit more efficient. Traditionally, you have the entire array of solar panels, and then that's brought through a transmission line down to one location to an inverter that converts all the power. But actually in that line, you lose a lot of the power. I think we calculated 18% line loss of electricity through that. So that's a huge amount that we're just wasting. So what we do is have these little micro inverters that are up on each panel, so it can take the energy right away, but we sell it back.
And the net zero part is, at the end of the year, if we can prove that we sold back more than we took, because there's times, in the summer when we're not going to be open for school, and all that power that we're creating is going to go to the grid, and times in the winter when we might not have enough sun, we're pulling from the grid. But as long as we show at the end of the year that we have not taken more than we've given, we're net zero.
We're hoping the kids do good math on that.
Composting toilets. How do you get away with that one?
That was a good one.
It was easy, actually.
Yeah, the school was really supportive of it. Generally people are a little frightened of that type of toilet, but the school really always wanted one. And I think they're really excited to have it. The kids are really excited about it. It's a really simple system. It's just a vacuum system. And I think, it's probably only going to collect enough waste to be dumped every 1 to 2 years. And it's just a simple tray they slide out, and it just creates basically a soil.
It's going to look like the soil you'd buy to fertilize your garden at the store. And the other thing is, funny enough, that was not a code problem.
Yeah, I wonder about the plumbing union. Where are they? This non-union job?
It's not connected to any plumbing for the city, so it's just considered to be a mechanical component within the building. So
we haven't told them about it yet. Right there.
What was the term when you put the PV panels on the other roof, the jump?
Scale jumping?
Scale jumping. Okay, so with the water, you're pulling water off the roof of the church, so you're really not required to use water that only falls on one site.
the way that that our building's part of the overall school site, so we're still using water that's falling on our site. But again, there's going to be some sites that just can't have it, so the scale jumping is supposed to allow you to, again, it's not, you can't get water from our church roof for the desert, but we're able to just jump one scale level, I guess, for that.
We're actually doing a little bit more because we're taking all of the water on that, almost half of the site, and we're having to treat that storm water because in the past what it did was ran out into our building and into the sewer where our building is, and we've taken that sewer away. So we're having to not only treat all of our storm water on site, but almost half the campus as well. So we've kind of improved it a bit. That's what we'll say.
It looked like the ceiling insulation was polystyrene. Is that right?
Oh, in the SIPS panels? Yeah, it is a, what is it, a polyiso?
Polyiso material.
So there's I think this is the only company that makes one that is, doesn't have
Formaldehyde. Yeah.
and halogenated flame retardants in it. So this is actually one of the few that's good, but that was tricky to find.
Premier Building Systems are out of
Tacoma, maybe?
Tacoma, Washington. They also did the great things for us because at first we couldn't get FSC certified plywood for the SIPS panels either, but they worked really hard to find that for us as well.
So is it a polyisocyanated or is it a EPS?
It's a polyiso.
Yeah.
I was just going to ask you, I didn't see anything mentioned about your, the source of the radiant floor system. Is that a sort of thermal panel that's on the roof as well, or how's that?
Yeah, actually, we wanted to do solar thermal, but because we had to be up on the church roof, we're away from it, and we actually lose too much heat in the transmission of the water through the pipe to get to our site. So solar thermal didn't really work for us. The radiant heating is just a point of use hot water tank, which is powered by the solar system, the PV system.
With a project of this scale, that was the simplest thing to do, and sometimes simple is the answer. So
yeah, we wanted to make it really cool and educational and do the solar hot water, but we decided just go with what makes sense.
Just to clarify, the orientation of your eco-house to greenhouse, that is which direction?
So that the majority of the site faces north. So it's all north light there.
And you still was meeting all the thermal requirements that you need for the insulation?
Yes. Yeah, we have no additional solar heat gain, so it's typically when you have a lot of daylighting, you have to find a way to mitigate the extra solar heat gain, which is definitely a difficult process, but we don't have to deal with that. Very highly insulated walls, and even our curtain wall system, the glass system, is very well insulated as well. So you can see, yeah, this is all the north side. You can see how the church roof, or the church building, casts quite a shadow on it, and that's in the summer, so it's even stronger in the winter.
we're not getting direct sunlight, but we're getting enough light in that space that it's doing what it needs to do.
It's nice diffused light. Good question.
Just wanted to-
So once this building goes into operation, you do the monitoring for a year, is there a long-term sort of balanced living, building, site management component to this? For instance, when you're cutting vegetative matter out of gardens or you're producing trash or as part of your operations in the classroom, are all of those things like being recycled back into the building and site as part of the long-term management component?
Good question. So it's basically after the question is after the 1-year reporting period, are we still continuing that process, and are we recycling anything that the site's creating in terms of waste or any of the plant matter that we're harvesting back into the building?
Yeah, and the idea is, obviously, yes, it's about being more than just a 1-year reporting period. It's, it's going beyond just the LEED checklist and making it for when you submit it. It's continuing this process. They just make a year so that you can show what you're doing. But obviously, the idea is that this building is a living building, and it's producing all of its own necessary things. It's taking care of all of its own waste, and that's to continue through its lifetime. So the recycling will continue, the use of water and water treatment will continue, the way the students will use the urban agriculture garden will continue, and I'm sure evolve as well. But yeah, it's just to carry on.
I think the good thing about the year reporting period is that's a time for them to get used to it and learn how to use it and know that it will work, and then carry on the habits of doing that and expand on it. So
yeah, we have a couple little more advanced features that are in there. So we've talked about you can't send any water down the sewer drain. So when you have typical floor drains in a building, that can be trouble for us. So a janitor may accidentally come in there and spill a cup of water down or wring out a mop or something, and that can't happen. So we've had to kind of block off all the floor drains, and what happens is things overflow into a little cistern bucket first in the classroom, and as that happens, it triggers a warning light and shuts off the water system so that the occupants know this has happened and that they'll have to deal with it and see what's happened before it goes down the drain. So then that water can be carried out and dumped in the rain garden naturally, for instance. So a lot of different things you have to think about, kind of retraining people, and as Stacy said, learning about the building.
Can you say something about the moss roof, if that has anything to do with the certification? not familiar with the moss roof.
Sure. So it's the moss. The question is about the moss mat roof. It's very similar to your traditional green roofs that you see around here, but obviously it's just moss, so it's a lot lower maintenance. It's good for shady areas, which we obviously have here. For us, it doesn't play a particular major role in the living building challenge in this project. It's mostly almost a demonstration piece. So we want to bring it to the kids to be able to see this kind of roof. We also want to be able to try out this moss mat system and be a case study for it so other buildings can use it. But as you see, we're collecting most of our water as much as we can. That's why we have just a couple small areas of green roof.
And I do think that it does help us meet the beauty and biophilia intent of the challenge, because we're using that as a way to do the sculptural shells and things that we're doing where the kids can actually see those shapes from the classrooms above. So.
And typically, as you may know, green roofs are used for several things: stormwater management, cooling your heat island effect, reducing the solar gain on roofs. And so for us, that really isn't an issue here. So it really is kind of a beauty, education, inspiration piece. Good question.
I was just wondering that after designing this and going through all this work, if you thought this would be possible to do it on like a larger scale, or if you saw that anywhere in the future at all?
Yeah, definitely. So the question is, now that we've done it on the size of project, we think we can translate it to a larger scale project. And I think that was our goal when we started this, was to prove that we can do something small and then think bigger and do it on a larger scale. I think it's definitely going to be more challenging. A lot of the project types, that when you get larger office buildings or apartment buildings, where it's definitely more user oriented, and if those users don't buy into this fully, you're going to have a lot of problems with a lot of these things. So the education portion becomes huge again. But in terms of the systems, I think that they're translatable in terms of net zero energy and water and how to achieve those things. And the material research, again, I think that's the big one, where we've done this once, we know what materials we can use now, and we can translate those to basically any scale project.
How many of the buildings that are going for this certification are natural, like straw bale or cloudberry, things like that?
So far, none have been. Yeah, the three that are certified are traditional wood construction and not straw bale. I notice you guys have a lot of straw bale stuff around here, which is great to see. I think that was the first time I'd seen it in person, so it's great to see what you guys are doing here. But yeah, none yet.
I think it would definitely be a great approach to take, though, because it would meet a lot of the requirements right away.
Almost covered everything.
Looking through the life cycle of all the materials, like we talk about no combustion, but then there's combustion to create a lot of these materials that come in. So how far back can you keep tracing the steps of the materials and so forth?
It's never ending.
So in a living world or a living community.
In reality, yeah. We have to go home sometime.
Yeah, but that's something that, that's something in the challenge that maybe isn't thought through all the way, where they don't allow it for some things, but it's okay in other things. I think that's just because products wouldn't exist without it in some cases, and we can't use anything else yet.
It's one of the struggles we're facing too, as we go through this documentation process, we often wonder how far down do we go. I mean, for this project, we've taken it to really every component in the building. We've traced its origin and its sourcing and its materials in it. So all the way down to little valves in the building, down to cabinet pulls, just every little thing. And it's just exhaustive, even on this project. So we're really trying to understand the balance of where that needs to stop in reality, what needs to help. And I think that's part of, as more living buildings get built, that's will kind of inform the challenge as well, and it'll develop. Like we got everyone. I don't think you're allowed to ask a question.
That you referred to the little stream as a runnel. Does it just run during storms, or does it run all the time?
Only when there's rain. It's part of the education process. We want it to really show them what's happening. So when rain starts, they'll probably want to run over there and look at it and watch the water travel through it and see where it's going. So that's kind of the exciting part, I think.
We're also hoping it doesn't flood and back up into the classroom. We don't know. We'll see. Well, thank you all so much. We appreciate you being here for this, and we have enjoyed our stay here. Everything's great in Missoula. You guys have done a lot of great sustainability practices. It's very inspiring to leave Seattle and see some of these great advancements you guys have. So thank you very much. We appreciate it.